This video was commissioned by Riot Games. However, for the purposes of not getting anything spoiled, and so we could safely theorycraft with the community, I was not given any extra background information. After watching the first 3 episodes of Arcane, it might become obvious that Hextech is really important for the series. But don't worry, in this video we will not talk about any major spoilers, and if we have to, there will be plenty of time for you to click away. Today we will talk about the history of Hextech, because Hextech has been around for quite a while and there is more behind it than you might realize. So without further ado, let's talk about what Hextech is and how is it related to the name of the series, Arcane. If we want to talk about Hextech, we first need to talk about the Rune Wars, which happened about 900 years before the events of Arcane. During these horrific times, mortals found these powerful runes around the world, and they soon realized that these runes hold incredible power. And indeed, these powerful stones were linked to the creation of the entire planet, which we call Runeterra. So with such power in the mortal hands, of course, every individual wanted to leverage the power of the world runes for the good of their own nation. And now, because every nation held a power of mass magical destruction, of course the outcome of the Rune Wars was horrifying. It was a massive disaster, and that's why, ever since then, people are afraid of magic. They know what magic can do. That's why in Arcane, and this is a minor spoiler, Heimerdinger and the Counselor, whose race was apparently nearly destroyed by magic, are afraid of it. That's why Heimerdinger respects magic. He knows about the events of the Rune Wars. Now, during these grim times, in Shurima, mainly around Kalamanda and the Odin Valley, a new story resolved around a race known as the Breckern. The Breckern are an ancient race that looks like crystallized scorpions. This race is so ancient, it is one of the oldest species on this planet. Each of these Breckern are a host to a magical crystal, which contains their memories, their dreams, and everything that makes a person who they are. After the death of a Breckern, this crystal is buried deep in the valleys, where it awaits a new host. A while later, after a new young Breckern finds it, they are able to inherit it. And after they do so, they join minds, and they inherit the mantle of all of those who came before them. In the story, Skarner describes the moment when he joined with his crystal. He immediately felt the magic of the material world around him. It was a deep connection to the world, like a low hum that resonated through every facet of his own body. This low hum is a very important detail, because you see, this singing is the language of the Breckern. So in the show, whenever you see one of these crystals and you can hear a bit of a tone in the air, that's actually the race of the Breckern singing from the crystal. And that's why the series is called Arcane. It is a link to the primal magic that comes from the crystals. Now, mortals have known about the Breckern for many years. They respected them, but they also feared them. They placed offerings in their name at the entrance of their valleys, which became known as the Crystal Scar. Yes, that is the same crystal scar you may remember from the old game mode known as Dominion. Later, when the Rune Wars came, the Breckern decided to bury themselves and hibernate in hopes that maybe the mortal races would wipe themselves out and the danger would pass. And so, the Breckern slept. Until about 80 years before the events of Arcane. The crystals started screaming, and those Breckern who were woken up realized that the mortals survived. And not only did they survive their magical wars, they came back armed with fire and metal. They delved deep beneath the sands to hack the living crystals from the Breckern. And you see, these thieves were explorers from Piltover. And we can assume being armed with fire and metal means explosives and pickaxes. There are 2 families mainly responsible for the mining of these crystals. Clan Jayopara, but more than that, Clan Pharaohs. The Pharaohs family became rich from harvesting these crystals, and that's because it was really dangerous to do so. Some of the Breckern were awake, and so if you wanted to get one of these crystals, you had to fight them. And there weren't a lot of clans that would sacrifice their own explorers. And so it was Clan Pharaohs that was able to build a monopoly on this. They called these crystals Hex Crystals, Hex relating to the magic. But sometimes, during the early days, they were also called the first crystals. Of course, the Breckern were a limited resource, and so to keep selling the crystals, clan pharaohs had to augment the crystals they already harvested. They heavily invested into chemtech and runic alchemy, and with those they created new, weaker, but way cheaper to produce synthetic hex crystals. The issue is that the synthetic hex crystals were unstable, and so they were especially dangerous if mistaken for a real hex crystal. But the problems just kept piling on. By creating these synthetic hex crystals, you help the Zone Grey, with the Zone Grey being the thick toxic cloud separating Zone from Piltover. And since Piltover was already hesitant to use the Hextech gems, their synthetic versions were out of question. But through espionage, intimidation, and murder, clan pharaohs made sure the production of these crystals would continue in Zone and their house would stay in Piltover. And they stayed as part of Piltover's illustrious Blue Wind Court. And this is where we recently got some new information. You see, if you log into League of Legends right now, in the client we are getting more information about the lore of Arcane. Specifically, this week we learned more about Jace. And since Jace is so heavily tied to Hextech, we got some really interesting details about how these crystals were found. First of all, and once again, this is a minor spoiler considering that the character didn't do much in the story just yet. But when the mage from Jace's childhood gave him a rune, I truly believed it was a rune stone, not a Hextech gem. Those two can be different. Because in the past, we have actually never seen a mage properly use a Hextech gem. However, in the client, it was revealed that the bracelet that Jace is wearing right now is in fact a Hex Crystal bracelet. The reason why this is so interesting is because this was the first time the lore revealed that mages were using the Hex Crystals. Which also means that the Piltovans were not the first one to discover these crystals. Before scientists got their hands on them, there were rare few who were already using them. This journal, which by the way is an exact copy of the journal which is in the series, also reveals some other really interesting details, such as the fact that the crystals can also be found in a valley where the sand never stops falling. We know this place from the map, and curiously enough it is in the south, so this also revealed that the Breckern were all over Shurima. And the journal also revealed that the Hex Crystals can be depleted. Them exploding is not the only way you get rid of their power. They can also be drained out, which means that by using them, you can devour the soul of the Breckern race. This journal has a lot more information about how the Hex Crystals work, but that is something we'll save for next time. And that was the amazing history of Hextech so far. Now, even though we know what the Hex Crystals are really about, no one in the show knows. No one is aware that each one of these crystals contains the souls and memories of hundreds of Breckern, dating back to perhaps the beginning of Runeterra. So yes, as we mentioned, every time you hear a hum around the Hex Crystals, that is the voice of the Breckern. And every time there is the high pitch right before the crystal explodes, that is hundreds of the Breckern screaming for their lives, right before they all die. Think about that the next time someone experiments with one of these crystals. And finally, yes, if you ever hear that chemtech is the opposite of Hextech, it is technically true because the chemtech can create synthetic hex crystals, which is quite a dangerous commodity in Zone. But we will talk about all of that in the next episode when we talk about what are all of the modern scientists doing with Hextech. And so, to end this video, since we were talking about the Hex Crystals and what they are capable of... Oh, there it is. It's there, right there. The internet is split into two categories. Those who know and those who don't. I would like to thank Riot for sponsoring this video. If you are not aware, Riot commissioned this, and the funny thing about this is that I would have done these videos anyway, so really, thank you Riot for supporting what I do. I really appreciate it, and you should be looking forward to more episodes just like this.